We're going to use this site for two different exercises. The first exercise, we're going to do a site assessment. Second exercise, we're going to do a little bit of planning and layout. The other thing you guys have is the handout that talks about some of the stuff about the site itself and some of the requirements of what we're going to do. So I'll just give you a little quick overview and then we can get started on the first part. Based on what we've been talked about today, what we want to do is, kind of simulate a very shortened process of what it's like to get a site, look at some of the elements that are on the site, and develop some strategies to providing some site design elements. So just a little bit of the stuff we learned in the morning we'll be able to apply here. So thinking about pre-development hydraulic conditions, being able to look at native vegetation, both existing trees, other areas, riparian habitat. There's wetlands, protecting, enhancing, potentially mitigating wetlands. It's a two-step process, but the idea is that we're eventually going to actually get some buildings and apply them to this site. And then thinking about some of the other stuff we talked about, access, amenities, views. As I mentioned, we have a site survey that has some minimal information, and the handout also has some additional information about that. One of the things is things to consider when we're looking at the site: soils, utilities, access, land use, habitat connections. In the second step, we're going to apply the program. So in the first part, we're really just looking at identifying buildable areas to protect. And then as we get into it, thinking about stormwater management, where we would do that. And as we mentioned, we'll be your roaming consultants to interpret rules and codes and some of those things. Just a little bit about the site that you have. It's called the Boot. It's 3.2 acres, and it is actually a landlocked property, so it's completely surrounded by development with the exception of the two access areas. So the blue arrows show where access is actually coming on site. And then the southernmost of those access is also the area where utilities are going to be coming on site. In the center, there's a wetland with a little finger of wetland coming out of it that is on site, and there's some mitigation requirements. There's a lot of trees on the site, and there's also a few that have been identified as special heritage trees. There's two yellow arrows, one on the south and one on the north. Something we need to think about of a trail corridor that connects through the site. There's a yellow sort of area to the south that's identified as areas of poor infiltration. So thinking about that as sort of a barrier to where you would potentially develop the stormwater management. And then the rest of the site that's white actually has good stormwater management potential. So the idea is we're going to just do a site assessment. So we don't exactly know what's going to go on the site. We have an idea that we're going to develop the parcel, but what we want to do is look at potential opportunities and constraints that are going to be maybe limiting barriers or potential opportunities. So things that are native vegetation to be retained, setbacks, buffers, other things that maybe limit where you can develop or where you can't. And then obviously some of the functional things. Where would it make sense to build parking? Where would it make sense to build buildings? You're doing this generally, you're not actually developing them right now. What we're going to do is a really schematic plan that starts to lay out buildable area versus areas of native vegetation, potential areas for stormwater management. It starts to look a little bit like this diagram. So it's diagrammatic. You start to just map out large areas of buildable, unbuildable area, and you start to incorporate some of the, looking at the site characteristics, topography, existing trees, wetlands, some of the things that you would do. Probably the best way to think about it is give things a hierarchy of like, here's high priority areas that are going to be potentially saved. Here's maybe the second tier of things that if we can protect them or enhance them. And then the third area, which is really going to be the buildable area footprint of the things that don't have as many constraints in that way. So we're going to do about a half an hour, and at the end we want to have a diagram that sort of looks something like this, and you can interpret it however you want, but you want to look at this list as a good example of some of the things we want to think about and be able to map on the site and be able to capture.
We looked at things we want to preserve, and the riparian zone and buffer, definitely the natural habitat, we want to protect that, and the wetland. But this wetland is oddly shaped and kind of encumbers quite a bit of the site, so we were thinking wetland mitigation and kind of tuck it in and integrate that into these preserve areas that we see. A lot of the trees, you can see the green dashed line around tree areas that we want to preserve, and pay attention to those as we develop the site. The trail system then would integrate into those trail areas or the tree areas and kind of come down, and we'd preserve this, and that would create a buffer from the neighbors while giving a nice route through the site that also integrates into the natural resource, the riparian area. So after that, we looked at, okay, what do we have left to construct? And the purple area here is where we thought we could site roadways and buildings, and if we needed to, a detention to take care of the bigger storm events. Stormwater-wise though, our intended approach is to do infiltration along within the setback areas, so because we can't construct in there, we might as well build rain gardens and infiltration trenches or whatever we can do to get rid of stormwater. And then these are natural dispersion areas here that we can take advantage of. The site grade is kind of doesn't work well for getting water into the tree areas, but we'll work that out as we go into more detail.
Yeah, my name's Ed Aban. I'm with the City of Bremerton. I'm with Group 3. What we tried to do here is basically identify the buildable areas, the preserved areas, or the buffer zone areas. And we figured out is where there's high infiltration or good infiltration, that's where we're going to build. And we'll try to preserve the areas that has low infiltration, so we minimize building new stormwater facilities. And also, since the topography of the ground is sloping towards the area where you're supposed to protect, we don't want to develop this and try to worry about building a stormwater facility that is costly. To optimize the use of the developable land, we can build our access here and have some loop roads to make it easier to go in and out of the developable land. Infiltration facilities will be built in the good infiltration area. The road that will be built will be probably passing along here, so this will be disturbed a little bit, but I think we can take care of trying to maintain the runoff in the roadway and convey it towards here, and maybe we can build another stormwater facility. Trails will be built around the perimeter and some meandering trails inside the property. And the trees that we will be taking out, we'll use them as bark mulch. We'll mulch them and use them as for landscaping.
I'm Craig Baldwin with West Sound Engineering in Port Orchard. So we looked first, I think, at areas to be preserved, the riparian zone and buffer as a priority, heritage trees and where there's clumps of trees. So we might have been a little aggressive, but we identified an open space here where you're saving trees around heritage trees. The same thing down here, areas where we thought those would be good open space. Third area that's, again, maybe more than what we'll end up with is heritage trees and some other trees there that we could possibly save. In terms of wetlands, we wanted to minimize the impact to critical areas, so we want to keep this wetland pretty much intact, except this corner is probably going to interfere with access and maybe development. So we thought we might trim off the buffer area here and mitigate that back here, still within the wetland area of this wetland. And this wetland too, probably chop off this whole thing and mitigate it in this area. So all of our wetland and wetland buffer mitigation is in a centralized area, a greater chance of success keeping it within where the hydrology is already naturally present. In terms of access, those are pretty obvious. We thought maybe we'd have our road going north-south and coming out here with a bioretention cell in the middle. We thought because this is a lower area and good infiltration, this might be a stormwater feature, perhaps a retention pond. But we're also anticipating that we'll be using LID to dissipate, mitigate storm drainage throughout the site, especially where there's good infiltration. We'd have rooftop infiltration areas, perhaps pervious pavement for the roadway. Down here, if we're building, we may need to take some of that stormwater from roofs over here to that facility. And our trail, we wanted to connect the trail and keep it within open space areas and bring it out to this building area here. But basically building areas all along this area and all throughout this area here for development.
So my name is Dan Wesley. I'm with LDC Consulting Group. Thanks to my group for nominating me. Tried to isolate where we had buildable areas given the site constraints. We noticed there's some areas down here which we need to conserve. Definitely looked at this low infiltration area as our primary building location just based on modeling impervious surfaces. And then went down through, see next on our priority, I noticed a large priority with the trail connecting here. So we tried to route this through the perimeters here and really try to take into these areas where we had some dense trees and wetland areas. Also noticed these utility access and vehicle access and really try to come up with a buildable area that would incorporate some sort of a loop design. And our discussion was really along the lines of really trying to eliminate hammerheads and T's in terms of access. Looks like we kind of noticed a distinct difference here with the low quality non-jurisdictional wetland and able to mitigate over here in this area and swap that out so we could get some actual connectivity through here in the buildable areas.